Jennifer.
Hello.
How are you?
Oh, doing pretty okay. How you doing?
Good, good. First of all, thank you for doing this. I'm in the process of just building a platform for individuals with neurodiversity. But at the beginning, what I'm doing is we were focusing on dyslexia and ADHD. But as we were growing, we're seeing like our platform growing with folks who are different, that have different neurodivergence, right? So it's
Uh-huh.
really encouraging to see one of our goal is to spotlight individuals and get more practical insights, not necessarily, the clinical side of the house, right? Because folks are really living through this, and I want to just get an understanding as to, okay, hey, how are you doing? You're employed, you're in a corporate, or you're in a different line of career, right? Or you're in college, or your mom with kids that have some sort of a neurodivergent, right? How's your life? How are you navigating? Right. And so we're trying to get that insights out and share with our community. All right, Jennifer, welcome to the pod. Could you start off by sharing a little bit about yourself and your journey with neurodiversity?
Sure. Jennifer Bierbauer, and I have spent most of my life undiagnosed. It was about 2 years ago that I sought out a diagnosis and found out I was autistic with ADHD, and oddly enough, found out through my husband, who talked to my aunt, who actually thought she saw some markers in me and my development early on, but apparently my father was not interested in me getting tested. So uh, it's been quite the journey, but I will have to say that nowadays is a lot better than it was in the 70s and 80s. Right now, there just seems to be a more welcoming, affirming kind of community, both inside my company and also in LinkedIn, which is very refreshing.
That's true, and we are seeing that as well as we talk to more people and within our communities as well. There's a lot of the stigma is going away and it's being embraced, and so I'm happy to see that. So, if you could share a little bit more about the process you went through to get diagnosed and what the assessment was, I think that'll help our community just get an understanding behind the scenes what the process is like.
All right. Well, my health care is Kaiser Permanente, and I tried to go through my healthcare system. And I think that some parts of the healthcare system may not understand adult neurodivergence, or even with female autism and so forth, because they said, oh, you don't quite seemingly have the markers. And so they were not willing to even refer me to another corporation. So it was actually talking with my husband. I said, hey, you willing to spend a few $1,000s of our flexible health spending on me getting diagnosed? And he said yes. And so I sought out here in Colorado. There's an organization that they themselves uh, do have people who understand adult autism and adult ADHD, and also understand how it can manifest in women. So then I was able to get a proper diagnosis. So it was itself a number of testings, a variety of things from, do you understand certain patterns and words and numbers? And then, of course, there was all sorts of questionnaires, and then questionnaires with my husband, and questionnaires with other folks, to talking, my parents and so forth. So it probably, from the time I started it, was maybe a month, maybe a little longer in terms of they had to gather up all those questionnaires, get it all together. So the testing itself was maybe a couple hours, like 2 days worth, only because couldn't do it all in one day. Um, but otherwise, that was kind of how it was. Gave me a good documentation of not just detailing how I did across the many different tests, but also offering ideas and suggestions. Because one of the other things in ADHD and autism in adults is that we've experienced a lot of that stigma you described before, and maybe trauma. So often we may have anxiety and depression. So sometimes there's some mental health suggestions in addition to, how to continue forth once you know who you are.
When just going through the assessment itself, were there different assessments that you went through for like to be diagnosed as being autistic and then for ADHD, or was it was there different exams, or was it one exam that kind of gave some insights and then you went deeper into different forms of
Well,
testing?
I think it was just different tests. Because as they say, it's, you met one neurodivergent person, you met one neurodivergent person. Like I was mentoring one person who has ADHD, who has really big issues with timing. My biggest problem with ADHD is organization. I don't share my desktop with anybody, and definitely not below the camera and all kinds of stuff. So I think that they were just trying to understand how I was, as opposed to maybe other viewpoints. So, I mean, as you said, they measured not just could I remember things, but also could I make stories out of things? So there was understanding the more creative elements out of these things, my ability to handle things. Although part of my thing with autism is that I'm always kind of half speculating things constantly, trying to figure out what's going on. And I even imagined parts of sounds. I'm like, is there like a mirror, double mirror? No, there was no double mirrors. They weren't doing, necessarily behavioral things, but maybe they were. You never can tell. I was kind of like that, but it was just, drawing things that you remember, and so uh, understanding shapes and some of the number things were like remembering a sequence forward or backwards or every other number or so forth, or how many words can you remember of this type or that type. So I mean, there was all kinds of differing things, which I guess would maybe, use different parts of the brain, you know. But I mean, who
Yeah.
knows? Maybe the future they can, do a nice scan and say, oh yeah, highlights in this area, you must have such and such. Keep hoping for Star Trek.
I could relate to being able to remember the numbers or, every other number. Never got that right. So what was the feeling like? So you mentioned that I think 2 years ago you went through the formal diagnosis and had the outcome. So what was that like? Because you've been in the career for a long time, and I'm pretty sure as a child you've had some struggles as well. So talk to me about what the feeling was once you were formally diagnosed.
Oh, I told the psychiatrist, yeah, psychiatrist, I believe so. Anyway, um, that it was a huge relief. It was like, 100 pounds off my shoulders. I finally knew who I was and why I did everything. It just made everything makes sense because growing up, I was bullied a lot, elementary, middle school, high school. And I kept wondering, why is this happening to me? Or, growing up feeling like, why can I not do these things that everybody else seems to magically do easily? And what's wrong with me? And kept asking that throughout all kinds of therapy and all kinds of sessions throughout my life. But I mean, it just a light bulb, or what's that, the Matrix, I took the right pill and magically, oh, this is what it really is. I was never that before. Okay. So
That's good. I'm glad to hear that because a lot of people we've talked to have similar. It's a form of validation. It's also a part of your identity. So I'm glad that you went through that and you were able to obtain that. Just talking about like schooling, right? Your high school and then college years and before coming to work. Um, did you have any like coping mechanisms or hacks, since you weren't diagnosed, right? But you still had to go through the process, go through the learning and different institutions and colleges and all. So how was it like? And then did you have any hacks or anything you could share with our listeners?
well, growing up, I think the biggest hack that I did way back when is that I've always padded things. I, instead of saying exactly how much time it's going to take me, I add in extra time, whether it's extra time to get to a classroom or an extra time for doing a project. I never said too precisely how much time it's going to take me. Um, because then that way, and heck, even for this podcast, I get on early. I don't wait for it to be right on time. I'm always try to be early. I always try to add that because my life has shown me that something always happens. I don't know if it's my anxiety or the ADHD or combination of the two. I always try to add more time in than it's going to take. Um, I think that the other things that I've always had, that even I saw a meme today on LinkedIn, is I always kept the idea of putting one foot in front of the other, no matter how small. What is one thing I can do on whatever it is? One small thing I can do to make progress. So always don't always worry about the big thing or the final thing. Was one thing I could do right now to make it a little easier and keep moving forward, because so much, if I think of the entire item, um, I might get anxiety or issues. But I guess the other thing that I've learned nowadays, um, is to always, I think they're now calling it, see, it was multitasking, but now it's called task switching. My problem is there are things that I abhor. I am not good at. I don't like finances, cleaning. These are things I don't like. But, sometimes you got to do them. Got to do those taxes. Is to find something I do like and like interject it. Um, and so just kind of alternating. Okay, maybe I can do clean up this section and play a little bit of a video game or listen to one of my favorite songs. Just a little something to get my dopamine up enough to continue forward for a while because I can't, my brain will stop me if it's too long and something boring. But other than that, the biggest thing currently, and so hopefully it is available in schools now, because it wasn't when I was growing up, is we have at work what they call a business resource group. It's just a bunch of people who um all are neurodivergent. And so it's just a place to let your hair down, not having to mask or try to figure out how to be normal. Uh, and so I don't know if schools now have peer groups that allow for that kind of thing, where because when I was growing up, I feel I isolated, like no one understood me. I was all alone, and it would have really helped had there been a peer group. So maybe you can start one if your school doesn't have one, because I think that would really help. Had I gotten been around that, but I've always had for at least one good friend that I could just be myself around, and that really got me through those years.
Thank you for that. I agree. I think that they're starting to have those peer groups, and then also there's the support groups amongst parents and other adults, right, that have a form of neurodivergence. And but I don't think it's prominent, but it's building little by little, and we want to be part of that to be normalized across schools and also at work. So you mentioned. Was it was it employee resource group, or you mentioned what was the group name
Oh,
that were
they called it business resource group. It
business?
was used to be employee resource group, but people like to rebrand things. I'm not
Yeah.
sure why, but
Okay.
yes. And so yeah, we just kind of volunteer our time to just communicate,
Yep.
just normalize it amongst ourselves.
What are some of the positive things that have come out of that for you?
Well, I think that even in today's society, it's sort of like a refuge that I've taken lots of things from LinkedIn and reposted it, and people say, it's affirming. It's just that, work oftentimes is, being that it's run by neurotypical folks, is not necessarily works for our brains. It's not that they're against it, it's just that, our brains, we need time down, and we need sometimes help with timing and organization and social things. But I think the other thing is that we're also, to your point about, you know, getting society on board, I think that we're also um, interjecting and teaching indirectly our fellow employees and our management by just being more vocal, because I think that oftentimes it's a whole awareness factor. And that's kind of why I, in my LinkedIn, um, do a lot of trying to repost things, even if, like, for instance, dyscalculia, if that's the way to say it, but I've always been good at math. Math is like my uh, jam, but there are people who have parts of their brains that are probably having trouble with that. So I'm trying to elevate their the awareness of the different brains that we have around the world. So.
That's great. So speaking of work, how what are some of your go-to strategies for time management and staying organized, right? As you have ADHD, I personally have challenges with just organization. So just wanted to know how you go about managing your day.
Well, my company uses Microsoft a lot. So for the my throughout my career, I've always had Outlook, and now we're dealing with Teams. Now, Teams and Outlook, well, Outlook is more on the email side, but teams I've kind of liked because, ever since we got out of COVID, we're dealing with a lot of hybrid efforts where people are in the office some days, but not other days. And so they have a little pop-up. Now, sometimes they said, well, that could be distracting. It's not distracting to me. I need reminders. So I'm all about that. But to your point, the challenge that I see is the whole idea that we also have to balance our personal lives. So I'm trying to get myself to try to post a lot of the stuff for home on my work calendar because I got to remember when to leave if I have to take the cat to the vet or something else that is time sensitive. I mean, it was probably a lot more challenging when my son was in school because then he too is neurodivergent, and so a psychiatrist only has midday appointments. So yes, I had to work with, okay, I gotta leave here. So I was always trying to coordinate with people on meetings. Okay, I cannot meet at between these times because I gotta go drive up, pick my son from school, take him to the psychiatrist, and then take him back to school, and then return to work. So it is a challenge, but I think nowadays is much easier than it was in the beginning of my career because, cell phones have more apps than you could probably blink at. Um, and then also we have our assistants that I won't name one of them because she's probably listening now. Um, because what I can do is that it's attached to my Google Calendar that we use for our personal lives. And so each weekday morning, she reads what's happening today and what's happening tomorrow. So that's also helpful. Granted, you can't just necessarily use that for work, but I think that the whole work and personal life is the hard part. But I've always been addicted to paper planners. I mean, even today, even though I've changed jobs in the company, I still have, I'm very tactile. That's kind of the way I work. So I'm always writing down, even if I don't relook at it. And I think they've even done studies that the actual effort of writing actually does retain better in the memory. But I've always had paper planners, but nowadays people can run around with their cell phones, which might be easier.
So for work related, you use Teams or Outlooks for reminders and those pop-ups. And for work, you use one of the in-home at-home devices, and then you get the day's rundown, I guess, the days or the next day too. Do you use any other apps, or more broadly, do you have any other go-to resources that you use for on a daily basis to just stay connected or engage on?
Staying engaged, that's been a roller coaster. Because granted, I didn't grow up that way. They had bulletin boards when I was growing up, online. That's when you had to have the modem and it makes a little weird noise. So yeah, it's not quite like it is today. That's, used phones chained to the walls. Watch Stranger Things. You'll get to see a little bit of my childhood. Nowadays, we do have Facebook, and depending upon my where I was in my life, I used it. As I said, I'm finding LinkedIn is my go-to. But I really like Attitude magazine. That has had a few things, although they seemingly use a bunch of stuff for children. I've also liked a few of the webinars from ADA, ADDA. So those the attitude and the ADA, that's more of the ADHD. But even before I was diagnosed, I really connected with I believe it's AANE. That was for more of the autism, because there was a great speaker um, about how it is to be a female growing up, and tears were falling. Being an engineer, really leverage a lot of collaborative environments with SharePoint lists and OneNote and things that are much better that can be used together with others, because I find that the more one can collaborate, the one you're using other people's best abilities and brains. But one thing that I've been dabbling in that seemingly is working against writer's block, because I someday want to write a book, is really Microsoft's Copilot. That's their AI thing. And, just to get something off the ground, a rough draft, I mean, it's wonderful to just have something that you're not staring at the blank page, although I do like blank pages, but it's really kind of given me ideas on how do I articulate different things, of how do I write this kind of letter or email or something. So I think that those chat bots, can perhaps be a real thing, but I'm more on the experimental side of them. And also, I fell in love with DALL-E 2, which is the more of the artistic side, because it kind of helps me to visualize things. And so I think there's some kind of designer that Microsoft has that you can actually use a couple of times a week to design things, and so you can make it pretty. And so that might also be helpful.
That's really good point. I use Copilot a lot, and that has helped me just to get kick started with some of the things I need to do. So I agree with you. Just going back to work, and one of the things that someone who's also an ADHD is meetings, right? So at work we have 30-minute, 60-minute meetings, right? And usually staying focused is a challenge for me, right? I was just curious on if you have any tips or ways that you stay focused during meetings, especially those that go on beyond like the 30-minute marker.
Well, it depends upon whether you're there in person or not. That's the real difference. I have become a screenshotter. If they are presenting any charts whatsoever and it's online, I am always using that screenshot thing of, oh yeah, that would be interesting. Oh yeah, that would be interesting. And that keeps me engaged, as opposed to going off onto my own Google search or something. If it's another thing is that if it's online, I look at the chat, and so sometimes just seeing what people are saying, because to your point, depending upon the meeting, if the meeting agenda you only care about 5 or 10 minutes worth, and to your point, if it's more than 30 minutes and you only care about some part of it, sometimes just noticing people's reactions or comments can keep me engaged, or going in. We like to use the little emotes, so occasionally putting an emote when appropriate. In person, I guess like I was saying with the paper planner, is trying to take notes. Now, I will have to confess that at times not always stay engaged in person, particularly if I'm anticipating that I'm going to have to say something. If I'm imagining that okay, we always go around the room when we're asking, what was our big victory or failure or something. I'm one of those stereotypical autistic types that I ruminate always any kind of conversation I'm going to have, whatever speech or whatever it is. Okay, I got to remember this. I got to remember this, and I repeat it to myself. So maybe it's a tie, when my autism and my ADHD run together. So in those instances, I'm probably not engaged. So, so sometimes it doesn't work. But now that I'm diagnosed, I just give myself grace that I may have to say, sorry, could you repeat that? If I feel that they're all looking at me and I was supposed to say something, but I didn't. So yes, occasionally I can't say I'll always be on top of things. So, but I'll do my best.
Being autistic and also an ADHD at work, what do you think is an advantage for you having those and navigating work life?
I think that I'm not attached to things as much as maybe neurotypicals are because I am always looking for the novel. I'm always my impulsivity is high, so we gotta switch, we gotta change, we gotta do something. I mean, I experiment. Keep calling growth mindset. I'm like, I was born with the growth mindset. I'm constantly experimenting. Will this work? Will that work? Will this other thing work? I mean, my husband fears when I said, "Oh, I've been thinking," and he gets scared that what am I thinking next? Because I am always brainstorming, coming up with ideas. So I think I bring some creativity. I think I bring a different perspective, which doesn't necessarily always go the way people would like it to go, or they may, look at me oddly. But so it doesn't necessarily mean that it results in good stuff, but I'm just saying that I live and breathe trying new things and experimenting.
Well said. Well said. So, in the workplace, you mentioned the business resource group. Um, and it seems like that has helped you just have a community at work. But just zooming out, even in general, in the workplace, what do you think that is missing, or would be something that would be nice to have for individuals with a neurodivergence?
There's been more of a focus on this, which is good. But I think in general, neurodivergent folks have been looked over in terms of hiring. Myself, it took me 3 months to get hired. And so, granted, I think the University of Connecticut has a group that's trying to bridge between academia and jobs, employment, and disability in also is focusing a lot on neurodivergence in getting jobs. But, especially with autistic types that may have behavioral considerations that are not seen as appropriate in neurotypicals ideas, despite the fact that many autistic people like myself have advanced degrees. Um, we have the skills, and so oftentimes I would like, hiring to be skills based as opposed to you fit the culture or something that's more behavioral, because I think we just got to change that behavior doesn't necessarily mean anything about one's intellect or abilities. And then the other thing that I think would be really good in the workplace that I try to promote is a lot more strengths-based perspectives in terms of performance evaluations. And even on LinkedIn, they were showing maybe even feedback. Is that so much of our models are on deficits? Oh, you did this wrong. Oh, you did that wrong. Yeah, I think I'm not sure if there's ever been a recorded amount, but I think neurodivergent people have probably been told they don't do something well, probably 10 to 20 times more than neurotypical folks. And so, yeah, we know what we're not good at. I mean, it's not a secret. So it would be much productive for us to improve our strengths instead of constantly beating ourselves up for the things that my brain, no matter how many medications or apps or what, I am going to eventually mess up because that little neuron didn't do what it was supposed to do. It's going to happen. I've seen it happen millions of times. So those would be my two things: hiring and strengths based as opposed to deficit based performance.
The performance review one really hits home because for the most part, depending on the organization, first of all, not to go on a rant, but sometimes they say it's a 360 valve and it's not a 360 valve, right? And oftentimes your immediate manager is now part of the performance evaluation or like feedback cycle, right? But but then the other part of it is it is a survey of sorts. Certain companies have that, right, where you have agree, strongly disagree, agree, the range there. And usually it's difficult because you get a score at the end, and then you're graded based on that, and then other solicited feedback, right? And I always had concerns with that because it's not the right reflection of my ability or anyone's ability, because there are strong, as any individual, there's strong suits and there isn't. And then there's, the layer of, neurodivergence. So how do you incorporate that? I've gone through that, and I've also, I've led a team as well, and I've always been sensitive to that. Officially, there was only limitations, right? Just because of how the evaluations are taking place, but still had to give grace where possible to support the team members. So I'm glad you brought that. That's certainly an area that needs improvement across the board. Um, you mentioned about hiring the right, going through the hiring process was a challenge, right? A lot of individuals now um, are in the process of looking for jobs, recent grads, etc. So what advice would you give someone that is, maybe just like you, right, who's diagnosed with autism and also is ADHD? What advice would you give them as they're looking for a job?
Well, I'll give some of the tips I've already been giving my current disability in Next Gen mentee. Is that you got to leverage your networks. And if you're not networking, you got to find ways to do so. So, like, what eventually helped me, because as you said, I got an interview, I got confused where things were, and got many interviews, but nothing was taking. But I went and I found every person in my college alumni that was going and being also at the company that I was interested in. I had a cover letter, I had my resume, and that's actually what started me down the road of improvement, was that. So, in fact, in one of my grad school classes was somebody who was saying, it is who you know. It's amazing. So, you know, even even if you're not sure what industry you want to work in, because my mentee is in software, and software is everywhere. So I mean, you can work anywhere. Is going to some conferences and starting to talk with people, find out what's of interest, or like I said, LinkedIn. Go in and read about what companies are of interest, and see what kind of trade shows or places you could meet up with them. It's really and granted, for those who have worse issues with autism than I do, I know it's kind of uncomfortable and stuff, but it is about building relationships. So always follow up, maybe a week or two after, submitting a resume, finding out who those managers are. It's just that important, because as long as one person likes you or thinks that's worthwhile, then you got like at least a little foot in the door. And that's another thing, is that nowadays, depending upon what industry you're trying to get into, try to just get in the door. I mean, don't expect to be getting that perfect job. As soon as you can get in, then you can find which way, laterally, up, down, whatever, that best suits you. But they got to know you to know, okay, yeah, she's great. She's a dynamo. Oh, you're more interested in, I don't know, electrical engineering. I don't know. So then you can move, because depending upon where you're at, there might be either adjacent companies, or if the company's large enough, you may be able to still continue working in that company and get that dream job you want. But you just got to get in the door.
No, that's very solid advice. You said to get in the door, try to get that job, right? I always say to some of my mentees as well, where look at the company as a whole, which means outside the department you're working on, right? Because this is just a stepping stone, right? And then you'll see opportunities. And the other part is they might learn more about themselves during this job and say, okay, this is something that works, exactly what you said, or this doesn't work. So I think those are really good advice across to anyone that's seeking jobs. So thank you for sharing that. I know we are coming close to time here, so what I think in closing, I just like to give the floor to you to see if there's any parting thoughts you may have to leave our listeners with.
My parting thought is that if you are neurodivergent, give yourself grace. I know that, self-care has got to be higher on the list. If you're spending any amount of time beating yourself up, you got to know that you got to live with yourself. And granted, I did plenty of that undiagnosed, and let the neurotypical world kind of dictate to us, and we got to stop that. And if you are neurotypical, please make a kinder world. I can't believe the stories of bullying at work, or what I lived through my school years. We just need to learn to make a kinder world, so that we could all kind of, because I think a lot of the anxiety and depression that neurodivergent people have is because of society, and then it's not that they have a mental illness. And so we just need to make it a better world for all of us.
Thank you, Jennifer, and well said. Thank you for being part of this podcast and sharing your journey. We learned a lot. Also, really good advice and practical tips for individuals that are navigating the workplace. So this is really helpful and informative. So thank you for being on.